Choosing the right franchise is a challenging decision because no franchise is the right fit for everyone, and there are a lot of variables to consider. However, there are 5 types of franchises that are not a good fit for anybody, and everybody should avoid like the plague, and that's exactly what I'm going to walk through in this video. And if you're new here, my name is Groce, a multi-brand franchise owner as well as a franchise consultant who helps entrepreneurs and investors to find the right franchise for them. To join the newsletter or apply to work with me one-on-one, you can go to my website at connorgroce.com. So the first type of franchise to avoid like the plague is what I call the side hustle franchisor. And I don't mean your side hustle because sometimes that can work, but I mean when your business is somebody else's side hustle. And here's how that usually happens. You may have a business owner who has a successful business, and one day they decide, hey, this wouldn't be this difficult if I just brought on some franchisees and I continue to run my business, they'll run theirs, and I'll collect some royalties and it'll work out just fine. And it might work out just fine for them, but for the franchisees, not so much. And so if you are in any franchise agreement, you are the customer of the franchisor. And if the franchisor's primary focus is on running their operating business and not on creating value for franchisees, that's where that becomes problematic. So instead, what you want to look for is a brand that's franchised by design, where the main focus of their organization is creating values for franchisees themselves and not operating other businesses on the side. The second type of franchise to avoid like the plague, what I call the indentured servitude trap. And something that I talk a lot about is that you should expect to be involved in the day-to-day operations of your franchise once you're getting it off the ground, but that you also should have an off-ramp so that you're not stuck in the business forever, and as the business matures, you're in a position to optimize yourself out of that day-to-day operational piece of it. Some franchises have you wrapped up in red tape from the moment that you sign on the dotted line, and they might have policies that prevent you from doing that, prevent you from hiring an operator underneath you to take care of the day-to-day operations. They might prohibit you from owning multiple locations and inhibit your scalability in that way. They might prohibit you from having your hands in other business ventures or from having a job. And all of these, come together to where you really have the upside of a job with the downside of a business. And that's a risk-return calculus that's never going to work out in your favor. And sometimes people will ask me, well, Connor, if I only want to run one business and I'm comfortable running it, why shouldn't I go after, one of these franchises? And I describe it as it's the difference between going camping and being homeless. If you want to go live in a tent for the weekend and that's what you want to do because it's the option that's there, that's perfectly fine, but you wouldn't come back and say, well, it's just like being homeless, because it's not. So the point is, if you want to own one business and run it forever, make that decision because it's the best option that's available to you at that time and not because somebody has a gun to your head mandating that you make that decision. The third franchise to avoid like the plague is what I call the money pit. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It's just something that isn't going to produce enough money to recoup its value. And some franchises cost more than they're worth. And it's not just about being cash flow positive or being profitable, which that's obviously very important, but you also want to make sure that you're buying a franchise that has the run rate to be cash flow positive enough to also hire a manager to cover that day-to-day operations. And then in addition to that, you want to make sure that it's something that is profitable enough to where it'll be worth more as a multiple of earnings than what it costs to start, because otherwise you're not creating any enterprise value. That's very important to make sure that you're not buying a black hole of just, a money pit that you're just going to throw money into over time and not create any value and really make a whole lot of money either. So the fourth franchise to avoid like the plague is what I call the Freeloader Franchise. This one is a little bit more subjective, but the entire point is that this is a franchise where you are paying more than the value that you're receiving and where the financial trade-off just doesn't work out in your favor. The way I think about it, there are a lot of different, areas through which value is recouped through a franchise. There may be a proprietary product or service. There might be branding, brand recognition. There may be business development initiatives that the franchisor does to drive revenue on behalf of franchisees. All of these different areas where franchisees gain value from the franchisor. And even if you don't have all of those, even if you have 2 of the 3 examples that I mentioned, that can still be a successful franchise venture. But if you're lacking all 3, that's where it really calls into question, is this franchisor providing me enough ongoing value to justify the financial trade-off of paying a royalty and paying a franchise fee? A Freeloader franchise has nothing proprietary about the service. There may not be any brand recognition, and there really just isn't any value to offer franchisees, to the point where if you're going to, get into that kind of a business, just start your own business and you really don't need to go after a franchise. And then the fifth and final franchise to avoid like the plague is what I call the passion project. And I would qualify that by saying I love when people are passionate about their businesses or just passionate about anything in general other than making money. I think that's a great thing. But when it's a franchise, franchisors, in my opinion, should have a fiduciary responsibility to create value for franchisees, financial value for franchisees. franchisees and help them drive cash flow, help them build enterprise value. And so if it's a franchisor whose passion is something other than, creating value for franchisees, and therefore their focus is something other than creating value for franchisees, that's not an area where I would like to be a franchisee. And it's very similar to when a family business goes public. A lot of times they have problems because when you go public as a company, you have a fiduciary responsibility to create value on behalf of shareholders. And it's not just about serving the interest of the family. And sometimes that can cause friction. It's the same thing when someone decides to franchise their business, in my opinion. Their entire focus and their passion should really about helping franchisees create value for themselves. So sometimes the problems with some of these nightmare businesses aren't obvious at first, but I'm hoping by sharing this, I can save at least one person from sinking their time and money into a losing franchise. And as always, if you have a net worth of at least $250,000 and at least $100,000 in liquid capital, I'd be happy to work with you directly to find the right franchise for you.